Welcome to the Black Diamond Advisory Expert Roundtable, where brilliance meets innovation and leaders converge to shape the future.
So let's talk about use cases. Constant currency reporting, or budget at actual rates, or actual at budget rates, and those are real common and easy to use cases for hybrid scenarios. There are cases where you can do some what if modeling, and there is a hybrid setting that you can use to improve cube view performance. I am going to be focusing on number 1 and number 3 on those bullet points today. Now, one thing I would mention is that for bullet points number 1 and 2, you do have alternatives. Hybrid scenarios might make your world easier. So you can certainly perform data copies using business rules across scenarios. We do it all the time when you're combining up actuals and plan or forecast and accordion forecast work. There's no rule that says you need to use a hybrid scenario or not. Although what you'll find is that sometimes a hybrid scenario may not have all the richness that you would want in a full out business rule. So it's not going to fit every scenario, no pun intended. It's not going to fit every situation, but it will be in a situation where it'll help you on a lot of cases. One other alternative that we do sometimes is we'll populate one cube or scenario with another cube or scenario, and we'll have a transformation rule set up in a workflow that moves it between one cube and another. So that's another case where you maybe want to duplicate data, do some transformation and what have you. So I just wanted to note there's some alternatives here, and there's even some more use cases that I'm going to talk about that I didn't prove, but thought was pretty exciting. And I've talked with Daniel yesterday about it, and it kind of changed a mindset and put something in a toolbox that we didn't have before. All right, so we need a business case. And this is where I go in and make up a nonsensical business. In this case, it is the Hybrid Parts Company. It's founded by Alex Murphy, the CEO, who was a member of law enforcement, wounded in the line of duty. He got prosthetics by a company. He ended up destroying the headquarters of that company and took it over and created Hybrid Parts Company. And for those of you old enough to remember, this is a twisted plot of the movie RoboCop. So I'm going to move on, just talking a little bit. When I say Hybrid Parts Company, this fictitious company is selling parts for hybrid cars. Mr. Alex, when he kind of figured out when I need to plug in at night to recharge. So I'm going to start a business around cars that need to do the same thing. They seek to deliver parts exclusively by hybrid vehicles by 2028 because they have an ESG program. The thing I needed to do a data demonstration was to have very large data units. And so that took some doing, and it's going to actually turn into more than one session. I've got the rule set that was necessary to do that. There's CEO Alex Murphy. I was wondering, like, if any of you guys watched the movie RoboCop? I mean, this is
no one got the reference. Yeah.
Now you see the CEO and Hybrid Parts Company. So, this is obviously a little bit tongue-in-cheek. We're going to get into something serious here in a second. Hybrid Parts Company has distribution centers, which I have repurposed a map that actually plots out BDA architects across the world. And now let's get in and let's talk about what are some key metrics. So this was necessary for me to set up the hybrid scenario and show you the things. So we've got a parts category, we got consumer, a manufacturing plant, a shipper, and a finance type. And then I've created a few sales accounts, a couple cost of goods sold accounts to intersect with this. So I'm going to jump in and show you what I've done in the applications. This is the very beginning of an application tour, and then we're going to do a poll question, and then we're going to move on. So first of all, I'm going to go in the account dimension, I have a separate account dimension that represents some sales and the cost of goods sold. I have a hybrid and a stubbed out with extensibility one that is going to show and get this thing pulled up, kind of the part type. So there's a hierarchy around this. And I asked one of our BDA consultants between projects to fill this out. And you notice it's got a decent amount of members, but not a huge amount. And I was going to accuse them of phoning it in because I wanted to be able to have a data unit of over 1 million records. But nonetheless, we have a customer use, kind of new and used. We have, a manufacturing plant location, again, with a little bit of hierarchy around it. On UD5, I'm just using our standard data type, and I created a member called HHPopulate. So in order for me to do some demonstration, I needed some real data so that I could prove that it's doing what I say it's going to do. So I needed to populate a large data unit using a business rule. That will be the subject of our next week's discussion. I went into UD6. Inside of UD6, we have a shipper. And inside of UD7, I have a payment type. So it can be financed through any one of these banks. You can buy in cash or with store credit. So anyway about it, that represents the dimensions that I wanted to lay out here. And you saw there wasn't a whole lot within each of these dimensions. So I'm going to go and this is a poll question that I do want to pause on. And I'm going to give you maybe 30 seconds here, but we've got 4 base accounts, the 55 U1s, 15 2s, 44 3s, 15 4s, 26 6s, and 29 7s. How large of a potential data unit do you think this dimensionality could result in? And Vincent, you're not allowed to answer. But Kateri, do you have that poll up?
Yep, it's coming up in a minute, Jason.
I was literally pulling up my calculator right now.
Vincent, you're not supposed to do any hints. All right, so here in a minute.
Struggle adding numbers, Jason. Struggle adding numbers.
1.6 billion. Hey.
All right, let's see if James is right. We're going to go on to the question here, and I'm guessing you had a calculator, James, or Excel.
I did. Sorry, I
Oh.
just realized that was rude.
That considered
I was
cheating.
amazed at how big of a number and got excited. Sorry.
But think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Those are not big dimensions, but the fact that I'm using a handful of them gives you a possibility of 1.642 billion. So I wrote a rule that could go through and populate all of it. Now, I have never heard of a data unit in OneStream that big. And I will tell you that I was crashing my environment when it was pushing 1 million. So what I did in this environment is that I went through and notice on text 1, I put a thing called populate. So what I did was I filtered down the ones that I wanted to populate with my business rule and filtered it down to 4 accounts, 10 UD1s, 8, 10, 7, 5, and 5, which basically gave me a maximum population of 560,000, which for this particular kind of laptop environment was considered big enough to prove. And I even did a set of logging with my rule, and sure enough, it landed right at 560,000 records and then quit because I put a counter in there that said if I got too big, it would exit the data unit. So there's some controls. And again, that'll be a next week's session on intro to data buffers, kind of baby's first data buffer is what I'm calling it. But anyway about it, I thought this was kind of fun that I'm asking a consultant to go and exercise some tongue-in-cheek fun and build out some, suppliers and all of that, and thought he didn't add enough, when in reality, it went an order of magnitude larger than I really needed to have. So, okay, we're going to talk about constant currency scenarios. So in a constant currency scenario, using a hybrid scenario, it's going to copy an actual scenario into another scenario with a different scenario type. We create a different FX type and associate it with that scenario, and then we assign it, and then we've got something. So I'm going to actually walk through some pictures, and I'm going to show it to you in the application. So here, I created a new scenario. And in this case, that new scenario is called HH actual budget rate. So I'm going to go into my dimension library here, and I'm going to show that. So here I have a hybrid scenario, and there are some settings that you need. These are documented in the slide deck so that if you want to go play with this, you can look at my slides and go after it. So one of them is this hybrid here is saying, hey, I want to copy the data as opposed to just connecting to the data. And our second example is going to show connecting to the data. I want it to copy. I want it to do all the financial accounts base in the cube that I'm pointing to. I'm going to use a plan rate for revenues and expenses. And that plan rate, if I go into FX, is one that I went and created, and I input a slightly different FX rate than I did for actuals. So I didn't mention this earlier, but the entities associated with this is the hybrid one. And I have a handful of manufacturers and then a parent. And the thought process was that if you're a Japanese manufacturer, it uses Japanese yen. If you're German, it's going to use the euro. I was going to say Deutschmarks, and my consultant reminded me that they're in the European Union. So we use the euro. And if you're a domestic one, we're going to have United States dollars. So we had a pretty fun setup of where things need to happen. So going back to the deck, just to kind of walk you through what all was required. I went to the FX settings. I set up a new one using a little green starred document there, and went in and put in the rates. And again, don't need to talk to that very deeply because this is something that's probably pretty standard for a lot of you that have multi-currency applications, but I wanted to have kind of a walkthrough of how you can do this. We assign that to the scenario, which you just saw. Oh, did somebody say something? Okay. We're going to continue on. Now, when I set up the scenario, one thing that we recommend to everybody is that when you set up a scenario and you define the dimensions associated with it, only do the bare minimum on the default scenario type. That will allow you in the future to not get stuck. This is something we found out kind of early in our life cycle as a company. So what I did is I went to the actual scenario type. I assigned the dimensions there, which lets me vary it if I need to for extensibility purposes. Now, in this particular case, I set up the same dimensions on the planning scenario type, but still, I would recommend this to be a good practice. And that could probably be a whole nother session. And feel free at the end to ask questions if there's any kind of updates. So once I have that scenario set up, I've got to pull question number 3, and I'd like Katery to launch that if you wouldn't mind.
Mm-hmm. You want to read it, Jason, for everyone here? I know
Absolutely.
There's some people
So,
might not.
What is necessary for the data copy to this hybrid scenario? So tongue in cheek, you can do a seance and call Bob Powers, ask him. You can execute a business rule. Is that the way you think this is going to go down based on what you saw? Will it require a data management job? Will it consolidate work, or do you need to do a rain dance? So, curious what your expectations are as to how this would get populated, this hybrid scenario. So, Katery, did that pop up and give people a minute to answer?
It's coming up.
Okay, I don't want to pause too terribly long on
Yep.
these, but want everybody to have a chance to answer it. So I'm going to move on to the answer, but if you're going to answer, just answer it the way you would have. This is more of a fun thing, not a
No quiz at the
tattling.
end.
Yeah, there's no ranking. We're not gonna we're not going to shame anybody for giving the wrong answer. So in this situation, the only thing that is required for this thing to move is an execution of the data unit calculation sequence, which is a long and fancy way of saying a force consolidate will make this happen. I did nothing on the scenario but set up the scenario and then execute a force consolidate. It actually moved data over to it and then applied the FX rate associated with plan. So I'm going to go in real quickly and show you a few cube views. So I have a data review cube view, and this thing takes a moment to run, which is part of the second step that I wanted to demonstrate here. So we'll give it a minute to run. And here I've got basically all of my hybrid cars. It shows that it's consolidated up. Now, when you look at this and say, wait a minute, I can't get 213 million from these, you got to remember these are Japanese yen and it's showing local. So it's translating to US dollars. This truly is the sum of the detail. So let me go in and show you what a hybrid scenario looks like in a cube view. So in this particular cube view, I simply have my accounts. In my column, I've got my total entity at actual scenario. I've got my total entity at that HH hybrid scenario that I talked about. And then I did a little bit of cube view math to say, what's the difference between those two? So I'll give it a second to run. And there it is. It really is this simple. I have solved constant currency questions with clients in 30-minute calls with clients. That is the beauty of hybrid scenarios. This, in my opinion, is probably one of the most common cases or common use cases for hybrid scenarios. All right, I submitted mine. And Kateri, what was the most common answer on this particular poll
So
question?
it is force consolidate.
All right, we have some quick studies here. Because that is the right answer. Now, that being said, there are settings in hybrid scenarios that we're not, this is an intro, we're not going to get into every single one. There are settings where you can ask it to require a data management job to do it. That would be a case where perhaps you want to change some numbers and consolidate, and you don't want the data overwritten. You can set up your hybrid scenario to do that. So there's a lot of power between it.